60 planes. 60 American fighter jets are burning on the ground at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar right now. Not damaged, not disabled, not sitting on a runway with maintenance crews assessing what can be repaired and what needs to be replaced, and what can be back in the air within 48 hours. Burning. The way things burn when a precision strike hits an aircraft parking apron at the exact moment those aircraft are fueled, armed, and serviced for the next morning's mission. The way things burn when the people who planned the strike knew not just where the aircraft were, but what their status was, what their fuel load was, and what the 90-minute window was during which 60 of the most advanced fighter jets in the American inventory would be simultaneously vulnerable on the ground at the same base at the same time. 60 planes. That number needs to live in the air for a moment before anything else gets said about it. Because the United States Air Force owns approximately 1,900 fighter and attack aircraft across its entire global inventory. All services combined, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps. The total American tactical aviation fleet is roughly 3,400 aircraft. 60 aircraft destroyed in a single strike at a single base in a single country in a single morning represents the largest single event loss of American tactical aviation since the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Not since the Korean War, not since Vietnam, not since any conflict America has fought in 83 years of aviation warfare. Pearl Harbor. And here is what makes this moment different from Pearl Harbor in a way that makes it more alarming, not less. At Pearl Harbor, the Japanese achieved surprise through deception, through distance, through the assumption that America was not at war and therefore not at maximum defensive readiness. Al Udeid Air Base has been at maximum defensive readiness for 17 days of active combat operations. It has Patriot batteries. It has close-in weapon systems. It has airborne early warning coverage. It has the full defensive architecture that the United States military deploys to protect its most valuable assets in an active war zone. Iran went through all of it. 60 planes. Stay with me for the next 30 minutes. Because what happened at Al Udeid this morning, how Iran knew where 60 aircraft were simultaneously, how Iran defeated the defensive architecture protecting them, what 60 burning fighter jets means for the air war that has been the primary instrument of American military power in this conflict, what it means for Qatar as a country, what it means for the global economy, what it means for every ally watching America's most important regional airbase turn into a runway fire, is the story that will define this conflict's turning point in the history books that get written when it is over. And that history is being made right now on a burning runway in the Gulf. Before we continue, a quick note. Many of the events we cover on this channel follow recurring patterns: economic stress, geopolitical escalation, and systemic shocks. While researching these patterns, I created a detailed report called the Global Crisis Survival Guide, where I break down the warning signals that often appear before major global disruptions and practical strategies for navigating them. If you're interested in reading the full report, you'll find it linked in the description below. Now let's continue with today's analysis. Let's start with what Al Udeid Air Base actually is, because its description as America's largest base in the Middle East makes it sound like one of many. It is not one of many. It is the one. Al Udeid Air Base sits 20 miles southwest of Doha, Qatar. It was built by Qatar in the 1990s and has been leased to the United States military since 2001. It operates on a 10-mile runway, one of the longest military runways in the world, capable of handling every aircraft in the American inventory, simultaneously including the B-1 Lancer strategic bomber, the C-17 Globemaster heavy transport, and the KC-135 Stratotanker aerial refueling aircraft whose destruction in the opening weeks of this conflict already removed the long-range strike capability that American fighter jets depend on to reach Iranian territory. It houses approximately 10,000 American military personnel. The forward headquarters of United States Central Command, the combatant command responsible for military operations across 21 countries from Egypt to Kazakhstan, operates from Al Udeid. Every American military operation in the Middle East, Central Asia, and portions of the Horn of Africa is coordinated from a headquarters facility on a base that Iran just struck with enough precision to destroy 60 aircraft simultaneously. The aircraft on the ground this morning were not a random collection of whatever happened to be parked at Al Udeid. They were the concentrated strike package that American air planners had assembled for the next phase of operations against Iranian targets. F-35A Lightning II, fifth-generation stealth fighters, F-15E Strike Eagles, carrying the precision munitions and electronic warfare equipment that have been the primary instrument of American strikes on Iranian command infrastructure. F-16C Falcons serving as the air defense suppression package that clears the path for the strike aircraft to operate. EA-18G Growlers, electronic warfare aircraft whose entire function is to blind Iranian radar systems in the seconds before the strike aircraft crossed the border. The attack targeted the entire functional architecture of American air operations against Iran, not random aircraft. The specific aircraft that perform the specific functions that make American airstrikes work as an integrated system, rather than as a collection of individual planes flying individually toward individual targets. Iran did not hit 60 planes. Iran hit the air operation. Let's talk about how Iran did this. Because the question of how Iran defeated the defensive architecture of the most protected American military base in the Middle East is the question that every defense planner on Earth is running through their analytical framework right now. Al-Udeid's air defense system is layered. 3 Patriot missile batteries providing the outer defensive envelope against ballistic missiles and cruise missiles at medium and high altitude. 2 SHORAD, short-range air defense, systems providing close-in protection against low-altitude threats. Phalanx close-in weapon systems on the base perimeter, providing last resort point defense against any threat that penetrates the outer layers. CRAM, counter-rocket, artillery, and mortar, systems protecting the most critical facilities from indirect fire. That is 5 separate defensive layers between an incoming Iranian missile and the aircraft parking aprons where 60 jets were sitting fueled and armed. Iran defeated all 5 in a strike that lasted less than 4 minutes from first impact to last. The technical approach Iran used is the same coordinated saturation architecture it has been developing and refining across every major strike of this conflict, but applied at a scale and with a level of target-specific precision that represents a qualitative evolution from everything Iran has done before. The opening wave was ballistic. 8 Imad ballistic missiles launched simultaneously from positions in western Iran. Their targets were not the aircraft. Their targets were the Patriot battery radars, the AN MPQ-65 radar systems that give the Patriot batteries their targeting data. Without the radars, the Patriot launchers are physically operational but operationally blind. They cannot engage what they cannot see. The EMADs hit 3 of the 4 radar systems in the opening 90 seconds. The second wave was hypersonic. 4 Fata missiles launched approximately 60 seconds after the opening ballistic wave. Their targets were the SHORAD positions and the Phalanx installations. Mach 15, maneuverable terminal phase. No intercept solution available to the defensive systems whose radars were already destroyed or degraded in the opening wave. The Fatahs hit their targets in the 30-second window between the Patriot engagement of the first wave and the system's attempt to reset for a second engagement cycle. The third wave was cruise missiles, low altitude. Sea-skimming approach from the Gulf direction, below the radar horizon of any remaining surveillance asset. Terrain following guidance that kept the missiles below 50 feet until terminal approach. The aircraft parking aprons, specific coordinates, updated in real time with targeting data precise enough to distinguish between the row of F-35s on the northern apron and the row of F-15Es on the southern one. The fourth wave arrived simultaneously with the third. Ballistic missiles targeting the fuel storage infrastructure, the munitions depot, and the maintenance facilities that support flight operations. Not to destroy more aircraft, to ensure that any aircraft that survived the initial strike cannot be fueled, armed, or repaired within a time frame that allows operational resumption. 4 waves, 4 minutes. 5 defensive layers defeated, 60 aircraft destroyed. The fuel and munitions infrastructure that would have allowed any survivor to fly burning alongside them. The targeting precision required for this operation, the specific coordinates of each Patriot radar, the exact positions of the SHORAD systems, the real-time parking status of 60 specific aircraft on specific aprons at a specific base, did not come from satellite imagery alone. Satellite imagery shows buildings and aprons. It does not show which aircraft are fueled and armed and therefore most valuable to target in a strike timed to the pre-mission preparation window. Iran had human intelligence inside Al-Udeid, or Iran had technical penetration of the communication systems that describe aircraft readiness status to the base's operational command, or both. The answer to which one does not change the operational consequence. It changes the counterintelligence emergency that is now running in parallel with every other crisis this morning has produced. Let's talk about what 60 destroyed fighter jets means for the air war that has been the primary instrument of American power in this conflict. The United States Air Force has been conducting between 60 and 90 combat sorties per day from Gulf region bases since this conflict began. Al-Udeid has been the primary staging platform for the strike packages targeting Iranian command infrastructure, missile production facilities, and military logistics networks. The aircraft destroyed this morning were not the entire American air capability in the theater, but they were the concentrated strike capability that the next phase of operations was built around. Replacement aircraft cannot arrive in Qatar within any time frame that maintains current operational tempo. Ferry flights from American bases in Europe or the continental United States take between 10 and 18 hours depending on origin and routing. The aircraft that can be ferried are limited by the availability of tanker support, a capability that was already degraded by the destruction of American KC-135s and KC-46s in earlier strikes. And every aircraft that lands at Al-Udeid in the next 48 hours lands at a base whose defensive architecture has just been demonstrated to be penetrable by Iranian precision strikes. American air operations against Iran from Al Udeid do not stop this morning. But they are reduced in scale, reduced in capability, and reduced in confidence by a demonstration that the base from which those operations launch can be struck with enough precision and enough force to destroy 60 aircraft simultaneously without warning. Every pilot who flies from Al Udeid tomorrow morning will fly knowing that the base they return to is a base Iran has demonstrated it can hit at will. That knowledge is not an abstraction. It is a factor in every mission risk calculation, every operational decision, every discussion between commanders and aircrew about whether the mission profile being assigned is worth the exposure it requires. The air war continues, but it continues differently. And differently means less effectively and more cautiously, and with an awareness that the costs are higher than they were yesterday morning. Now let's talk about Qatar, because what happened to Al Udeid this morning did not happen in an empty desert. It happened in a country of 2.8 million people, a country that has spent the last 2 decades building the most remarkable economic transformation in the history of the Gulf, a country whose sovereign wealth fund manages $475 billion of global assets, a country that hosted the World Cup 2 years ago, a country that has been trying with increasing desperation for 17 days to maintain the position of a nation hosting an American base without being treated as a combatant in the war that base is conducting. That position is gone this morning. Qatar cannot host an American military base that Iran just struck with 60 aircraft destroyed and simultaneously describe itself as a neutral party in the conflict. The strike resolves the ambiguity that Qatar has been managing since February 28th. Al Udeid is in Qatar. Qatar is in the conflict. The missiles that hit the aircraft parking aprons did not distinguish between American military personnel and Qatari territory. The Qatar Investment Authority, the sovereign wealth fund that manages $475 billion of assets across global equity markets, real estate, infrastructure, and private equity, opened its morning with a fund manager meeting that had nothing to do with investment strategy and everything to do with what the strike on Al Udeid means for the political and physical security of the fund's home country. Sovereign wealth funds are not simply investment vehicles. They are the financial expression of a country's long-term stability. Their investment decisions are premised on the assumption that the home country's governance, physical security, and political relationships are stable enough to support long-term capital allocation strategy. Qatar's fund manager team this morning is looking at a country whose largest tenant just had 60 aircraft destroyed on its soil and calculating the exposure. The immediate response from global markets was visible within minutes of the strike's confirmation. Qatari sovereign bonds, the debt instruments through which Qatar finances its development projects, saw yield spreads widen. That is the financial market's way of saying the risk of holding Qatari debt just increased. The real estate market in Doha, which has been under pressure since the airspace closure, faces a more fundamental reassessment. The expatriate workforce that represents 85% of Qatar's population, the engineers, the financial professionals, the construction workers, the service industry employees who make Qatar's economy function, is making individual calculations about personal safety that no government statement can fully manage. Australia's government has already ordered non-essential officials to leave the UAE and urged citizens to evacuate the Middle East while flights are available. That guidance was issued before the Al Udeid strike. Its urgency level has changed since this morning. Let's talk about what the Al Udeid strike means for the global energy market. Because Qatar is not just a country with a sovereign wealth fund and a famous football stadium. Qatar is the world's third largest natural gas exporter. The country that supplies a significant portion of Europe's liquefied natural gas, the supply that Europe pivoted to after Russian gas was cut, the supply that has already been disrupted by Iranian strikes on Qatar's LNG production facilities. Al Udeid Air Base was the primary American military asset, providing air cover for what remained of Qatari energy infrastructure security operations. F-35s from Al Udeid have been flying protective combat air patrols over the approaches to Qatar's LNG terminals. EA-18G Growlers from Al Udeid have been providing electronic warfare suppression against Iranian drone and missile guidance systems targeting Qatari energy facilities. The aircraft are gone. The protective missions those aircraft were flying cannot be flown today. Iran's targeting of Al Udeid was not only a military operation, it was an energy operation. It was the removal of the air cover, protecting the last functioning pieces of Gulf LNG infrastructure from the adversary that has demonstrated both the capability and the willingness to target that infrastructure directly. European natural gas futures moved the moment the strike was confirmed, not gradually, immediately, because the traders pricing European energy for winter delivery understand the chain that connects an aircraft parking apron in Qatar to a family's heating bill in Germany. The chain runs through LNG terminal security to production capacity, to shipping availability to European import volumes, to stored gas reserves to winter supply sufficiency. That chain is shorter this morning than it was yesterday. And shorter means more expensive, and more expensive means colder. Germany's strategic gas reserves are at 68% capacity. Under normal seasonal drawdown, they would reach a comfortable pre-winter refill level by October. Under current conditions, with Russian supply cut, with Qatari LNG disrupted, with the air cover protecting remaining Gulf energy infrastructure just destroyed at Al Udeid, the October comfort level is not the projection any serious energy analyst is using. The number German energy planners are actually using this week is the number of days they have before stored reserves fall below the level required to guarantee residential heating through a northern European winter. That number has a date attached to it. The date is classified, the implication is not. Let's go further downstream. Because the Al Udeid strike's consequences do not stop at the borders of countries that import Qatari gas. They run through the global supply chain in ways that reach every economy on Earth. South Korea imports 40% of its LNG from Qatar. South Korean manufacturing, the semiconductors, the display panels, the automotive components that feed supply chains across the global electronics and automotive industries, runs on energy. LNG is a primary energy input for South Korean industrial production. A sustained disruption to Qatari LNG supply does not just raise South Korean energy prices. It raises the cost of manufacturing every product that South Korean factories produce. Samsung makes chips at Pyeongtaek. Those chips go into smartphones made in Vietnam, into laptops assembled in China, into automotive control systems installed in cars built in Germany and the United States and Japan. The energy cost of making those chips is a line item in Samsung's production cost. That line item is moving. And when it moves, the movement propagates through every product that chip ends up in, at every stage of the supply chain, until it arrives in the hands of a consumer who notices their new phone costs more than they expected, and does not know that the price increase traces back to an aircraft parking apron in Qatar. A textile worker in Bangladesh produces garments for European fast fashion brands on a production schedule calibrated to energy cost assumptions that were made before February 28th. Her factory runs on electricity generated from fuel oil. Fuel oil prices have moved 40% since this conflict began. Her factory's operating margin was thin before the conflict. It is negative now. The factory manager is making decisions about production volumes and worker hours that will show up in employment statistics in Dhaka next month, and that trace directly to a runway fire in Qatar this morning. 8 billion people downstream, 60 planes on a runway in Qatar. The distance between those two facts is the entire economy that connects the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world. Here is what American officials said about Al Udeid's security before this morning. And here is the precise shape of what those statements did not prepare anyone for. CENTCOM described Al Udeid as the most heavily defended American base in the region. Patriot batteries, close-in weapon systems, airborne early warning coverage. Active force protection measures continuously updated based on threat assessments. The implication of every briefing about Al Udeid's security was that it was protected against exactly the kind of strike Iran just conducted. The defensive architecture was real. It existed. It has intercepted dozens of Iranian drones and missiles targeting Qatar in the past 17 days. It was not fake, and it was not negligent. It was insufficient. And the insufficiency is not primarily a hardware problem. It is an intelligence problem. The Patriot radars cannot engage what they do not detect. The SHORAD systems cannot intercept what arrives faster than their engagement timeline. The phalanx cannot stop a missile that has already destroyed the sensor that would have triggered its response. Iran's ability to sequence 4 waves of different weapons, ballistic, hypersonic, cruise, and ballistic again, in a 4-minute window that defeated each defensive layer in the order that maximized the subsequent wave's effectiveness, is not the capability of a military improvising under pressure. It is the capability of a military that has been studying American base defense architecture for decades with enough analytical precision to design an attack sequence that defeats each layer using that layer's specific operational limitations against it. The Patriot radar's reset time, the SHORAD engagement altitude floor, the phalanx's response latency, the CRAM's coverage arc. Each limitation individually is known and documented in military literature. Understanding how they interact when stressed simultaneously and designing a 4-wave attack sequence that exploits those interactions in a specific order is the product of institutional analysis, testing, and preparation that does not happen in weeks or months. Iran has been preparing to strike Al Udeid for years. This morning, Iran used that preparation. And the second thing missing from every official statement issued since the strike's confirmation, the casualty number. CENTCOM has confirmed fatalities and injuries. It has not provided specific numbers. For a strike that hit fueled and armed aircraft on parking aprons where ground crews and maintenance personnel were working on pre-mission preparation, the specific number that CENTCOM is not yet releasing is not going to be a small one. And the management of that numbers release is the most visible sign of an administration calculating the public narrative around the worst single-event military loss America has experienced in 83 years. Russia's defense ministry issued a formal assessment within 3 hours of the strike's confirmation. The assessment was the most detailed and technically specific official Russian military commentary on any single event in this conflict. Russian analysts described the four-wave attack sequence as the most sophisticated application of multi-domain coordinated strike doctrine against a fixed defensive installation in the history of modern warfare. They noted that the sequencing, ballistic to disable radar, hypersonic to defeat shored, cruise to hit aircraft, ballistic to destroy support infrastructure, represented a tactical evolution beyond anything demonstrated in any previous conflict, including Russia's own operations in Ukraine. Russia published this assessment publicly, not as classified analysis shared with allies, as public commentary available to every military on Earth. Russia is not simply analyzing what Iran did. Russia is ensuring that every military planner in every country understands that the doctrine Iran just demonstrated publicly works against the defensive architecture America deploys to protect its most important bases. That is a lesson Russia wants distributed, because Russia's strategic environment includes American bases in Europe protected by the same defensive architecture that just failed to protect Al-Udeid. Russia is using Iran's demonstration to tell NATO defense planners that the assumptions underlying European-based defense need to be updated publicly. Now, China's response was the most operationally consequential of any major power. Beijing issued a formal travel advisory upgrading the risk level for all Chinese nationals in Qatar to the highest category and activated consular emergency services for the 200,000 Chinese nationals in the UAE. Simultaneously, Chinese Naval Command issued updated threat assessment protocols for South China Sea operations that incorporated the tactical lessons of the Al-Udeid strike. The specific update, Chinese naval planning has revised its threat model for American-based defense in Guam and Japan, in South Korea, the forward bases that American Pacific Command uses to project power toward Chinese territory, based on what Iran demonstrated in Qatar this morning. The four-wave sequencing, the radar-first targeting, the hypersonic penetration of shored, all of it has been added to Chinese operational planning for a contingency that Beijing hopes never arrives but is constitutionally required to plan for. Taiwan's defense ministry issued a statement calling for restraint while simultaneously requesting an emergency consultation with American Pacific Command about the implications of Al-Udeid for the defensive architecture protecting Taiwan's Strait American assets. The Patriot batteries defending American interests in the Western Pacific use the same AN/MPQ-65 radar system that Iran just demonstrated it can defeat with an opening ballistic wave. Taiwan's defense planners are not overreacting. They are doing their jobs. The Gulf states are in a crisis that no public statement from any of them is accurately reflecting. Saudi Arabia intercepted 12 Iranian drones on the same day as the Al-Udeid strike. The strikes were coordinated to stress Saudi air defenses simultaneously with the Qatar operation. UAE stopped 10 missiles and 26 drones. Bahrain's emergency services responded to strikes on its eastern coast. Every Gulf state's air defense was engaged simultaneously as Al-Udeid burned. That coordination, the simultaneous stressing of every Gulf air defense system while the primary American air base in the theater was destroyed, was designed to prevent any Gulf state from redirecting its defensive assets to support Qatar while the Al-Udeid strike was in progress. Iran planned for the regional response as precisely as it planned for the base defense. NATO called an emergency session. Not a scheduled consultation, an emergency session attended by defense ministers. The alliance, whose 31 members operate American forward bases protected by the same defensive architecture that failed at Al-Udeid, spent 4 hours discussing what the failure means for the assumptions underlying collective defense in Europe. The session produced no public statement. The private conversations it produced will shape European defense procurement decisions for the next decade. Let's talk about the domestic American political consequence of 60 aircraft destroyed at Al-Udeid, because this war has been running against a backdrop of 90% domestic American opposition, and a president who has been managing that opposition through a narrative of swift, decisive, winning operations that are degrading Iranian capability and approaching a resolution. That narrative has a before and an after. The before is everything up to this morning. The after starts now, 60 aircraft, the largest single-event American aviation loss since Pearl Harbor, destroyed on the ground at a base described as the most heavily defended in the region by an adversary that American officials have spent 17 days describing as degraded, depleted, and diminishing in capability. The Senate Armed Services Committee had already been pushing for closed briefings on operational costs and casualty numbers before this morning. The committee chair has publicly stated that the $11.3 billion spent in the first 6 days of operations did not produce the outcomes it was supposed to produce. The House Budget Committee has been calculating the financial trajectory of continued operations against available defense appropriations. The strike on Al Udeid does not just change the military calculation, it changes the political one. The 90% domestic opposition to this war was opposition to a war that was being described as approaching its endpoint. It is now opposition to a war in which the most important American air base in the theater just lost 60 aircraft in 4 minutes. The constituency for continuing, always narrow against 90% opposition, has not grown this morning. Trump has been saying for 17 days that Iran is about to surrender. Iran just destroyed 60 American aircraft. The gap between those two statements is the political crisis that the next 48 hours of American domestic politics is going to be organized around. Here is what Al Udeid Air Base burning means for this war from this morning forward. It means the air campaign that has been America's primary instrument of military power in this conflict is operating from a base that Iran has demonstrated it can strike at will with enough precision to destroy 60 aircraft in 4 minutes. Every aircraft that lands at Al Udeid for the rest of this conflict lands in a target that Iran has already ranged, targeted, and proven capable of hitting. It means the largest single-event American aviation loss since Pearl Harbor happened on day 17 of a conflict whose official narrative has been degraded capability and approaching resolution. The gap between that narrative and 60 burning aircraft on a Qatari runway is not a gap that press briefings can close. It means Qatar, the country that tried for 17 days to host an American base without being in the war, is in the war. Its airspace is closed, its LNG production is disrupted. Its sovereign wealth fund is managing a new risk category. And the American air cover that was protecting what remained of its energy infrastructure burned on the runway this morning.